Shalom, shalom. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel. And we've started a series called Does Demons Exist? Many of you probably have heard of the subject as demon possessions, as dibuk. So many different books and materials have been written. And just wanted to give an overview as do demons exist? The majority of people who basically follow Christianity would say it does. Now, please understand, this is not to endorse the Christian point of view, but rather to understand the period of time in which a lot of these thoughts were brought forward. A great change has taken place in the concept of angelology and demonology, at least in certain circles within Judaism. And by the last centuries of before the Common Era, in this period of religion and safeguarding its monotheistic character in various ways, nevertheless took on many traits of a dualistic system in which God and the forces of good and truth were opposed in heaven and on earth by powerful of evil and deceit. And it seems to have been also under the influence of the Persian religion, with its opposition of what is considered Ormuzd, the good god, and Ahriman, Angra Mainyu, the evil god. But at the same time, the Jewish dualism drew on older native resources in constructing a more elaborate demonology. Ancient mythological themes and figures from the Bible, only potentially like demonic, like Satan, were drawn in to fill in a large conception of the roles of evil spirit in the cosmos. It's characteristic of this period that evil spirits are led by a prince, often called Bilal, but also Mastema, Satan, or other names. The spirits of good and evil are struggled within human soul. For in this period, the role of demons is often conceived as the tempting of men to evil rather than inflicting physical harm. And as a result, there are many passages it is difficult to say whether spirits, quote-unquote, refers to demon external to man or a trait within the human soul. Belial or Bilar, a corruption of the original form, is the most common name of the leader of the demons in the Dead Sea Scroll, and occurs in other intertestamental literature and in 2 Corinthians, which we're going to get into that. Chapter 6, verse 15, Belial, the Hebrew Belial, which is a Hebrew compound of the word which etymologically means no benefit, no thriving, and liberally used often as an equivalent to scoundrel. And believe it or not, we have a lot of scoundrels today. But already in the Bible, the streams of Belial mean streams of destruction. 2 Samuel, or 2 Shmuel, chapter 22, verse 5, and Psalms 18, verse 5, also makes mention of this idea of a destroyer or destructive agent. In the intertestamental period of the literature, Belial is the spirit of perversion, the angel of darkness, the angel of destruction, and other spirits are also subject to him. Mastema, which as common noun means approximately enmity or in opposition, as in Hosea chapter 9, verse 7 and 8. And some passages in the 5 scrolls is a demon, Prince Mastema, in Jubilees, in the apocryphal books of Jubilee, chapter 11, verse 5, and chapter 11, verse 5, verse 11, chapter 17, verse 16, and the continuing verses. And perhaps also in the document of Damascus, in chapter 16, verse 5, the watchers of the Aram, the Edim, are a type of angel mentioned also in Daniel, chapter 4, verse 10, 14, and 20. So to this class of intertestamental literature, there is assigned angels who, according to Genesis chapter 6, verse 2 and 4, cohabited with women before the flood and fathered the race of giants. And this you can take a look at in the Testament of the Patriarchs in Reuben chapter 5, verse 6 through 7, and also of Naphtali, chapter 3, verse 5, and the Genesis of Apocryphon, chapter 2, Apocryphon, book 2, chapter 2, verse 1 and 16. Also, you'll find this in Asmodeus, in Tobit, chapter 3, verse 18 and verse 17, which is a demon who was slain by the first 7 husbands of Sarah, who becomes the wife of Tobias, son of Tobit. Now, as we enter into the history of this whole entire notion, it's important for us to take a look at the first century literature, which really took place, came to be resumed between, I would say, the year 100 of the Common Era to about 250, the literature of the Christian Bible, the New Testament. In the New Testament, demonology's part reflects contemporary popular belief during the time of rabbinical law during the later part of the Tanaims. And this turns up into rabbinical literature, and we'll see that as well, the rabbinical literature. In part, this dualism is attested to in sectarian literature from Qumran. Demons are called, not demons, they're called unclean spirits. In other words, spirits that are dirty or that are impure. And as rabbinical literature, we'll see more about this, and they are believed to inhabit waste places. In other words, like you have the story of the man that was enslaved by a legion of unclean spirits, and he was walking around and about in the cemetery, and he had an incredible strength. And later we read that basically Jesus came and exorcised these legions out of him, and were allowed to go into the pigs. So basically they became embodied in pigs, and they fell off the cliff, or were forced because of the madness of the unclean spirits that forced them to jump the cliff. So it's the old saying, the unclean spirit went with the unclean animals. And they are believed to inhabit waste places. Possessions by demons causes or associated with various sickness, especially those in which there is a perversion of human personality, so that the demons, not the man himself, directs his act and speech. You can see that in the Christian Gospel of Mark chapter 1, verse 23, verse 26, chapter 9, verse 17 through 29, and the story of the swine, which I just mentioned, in Matthew chapter 8, verse 28 through 34, Mark chapter 5, verse 1 through 20, Luke chapter 8, verse 26 through 39, which I always remind my fellow Christian friends that imagine if these demons possessed pigs and you eat pigs, aren't you digesting perhaps these spirits of uncleanliness? This is something that falls within the rabbinical concept of unclean animals and how it can affect the soul of a human being. But nevertheless, this is not about kashrut. It's more about, do demons exist? And this illustrates vividly the persistence of the very ancient popular belief, as does the parable of Matthew 12, verse 43 through 45, in which the unclean spirit, after wandering through the wilderness, takes 7 devils with him, independent personality or power, but are subject to a prince, Beelzebub. Famous Beelzebub, by the way, was the accusation that was lodged onto Jesus. Or Satan, which means an adversary in Hebrew, harmless but as a cosmic reality of great importance, the enemy of God and man, according to Paul's writing in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. So Beelzebub, which is really the Lord of the Flies, is the name applied to the chief demons by both Jesus and his opponents. And you'll see that in Matthew chapter 10, verse 25, chapter 12, verse 24, verse 27, Mark 3, verse 22, Luke chapter 11, verse 15 through 19. Now, obviously in the first century, even the later Tanaim, they clearly had a belief in the idea of these unclean spirits, or what we call demons in today's English language, which is very hard to be able to call it demons, as we mentioned in the first video. But nevertheless, The correct explanation of the name is so much disputed, and the new evidence of the Ugarit identification of Beelzebub with Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 2, possibly there were two different original forms. Beelzebub, meaning Baal, which is the prince, or Lord of the Shrine. And later Beelzebub, or Lord of the Flies, a famous book that many of you have read. The Ugarit textbook on this can be found also regarding this. Now, what about the Talmud? Keep in mind, a lot of this goes right into the rabbinical thought about demons that have a place in the rabbinical literature and later on throughout Jewish history, especially when we get into the esoteric manuscripts, the Zohar, the Kabbalah, and so forth. It all derives from the ancient source, and many of you will probably be a little bit upset with me, but a lot of it comes from early Christianity, and it reeks back into the Talmud and the rabbis of that time. Reference are made to a belief in demonology during the Tanaic period. The mazakim is harmful spirits, are said to have been created on the eve of the Shabbat of creation. Avot chapter 5 verse 6. But this later reference is only to be made to demons in the entire Mishnah. Now, according to the accomplishment of both Hillel in Sefer 16:9 and his disciples, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was their knowledge of speech of the Shadim. Shadim is, you could say, called devils, or these beings, existence entities, in Sukkot 28a. The latter also gives the analogy of a ruach tezazit, a spirit of madness, craziness as it were, that would enter a man and being exercised in order to explain to the heathens the anomaly of the law of the red heifer, although he agreed with his wondering disciple that this was but putting him off with a straw, and that he himself did not accept it. And this you'll find it also in the Talmud, in P.O. 48a and Numbers of Midrash 19:4. And although the statement refers to Eretz Israel, the Jerusalem Talmud is markedly free from Shadims and Ruchot. A passage in the Babylonian Talmud specifically states various beliefs connected with demons which were current in Babylon were ignored in Eretz Israel. Where Eretz Israel, they translated Shida and Shidot, according to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 8, as carriages. In Babylon, they rendered them as male and female demons. That you can see it in Gittin 68a. The Palestinian Rabbi Yohanan stated that the mazikim, these are harmful spirits, were used to hold sway in the world that disappeared with the erection of the sanctuary in the wilderness. And that you'll see in Numbers Rabbah 12, chapter 12, verse 30. Demonology, however, is more prominent in the Palestinian Midrashim than in the Yerushalmi Midrashim. On the other hand, the Babylonian Talmud is replete with demonology, obviously under the influence of the belief in demons, which was widespread in Babylonia. And in fact, in a response published by Levin Osar on page 20 in the Geonim, page 262, Haigaon states that the belief in demons was so widespread in Surah, since it was near to the old Babylonia and to the house of Nebuchadnezzar. Whereas the more distant in Pumbita, they were far from such ideas. The Babylonian Jews lived in a world which was filled with demons and spirits, malvolent. There was very violent spirits, and sometimes benevolent, who inhabited the airs and the trees and the waters and the roofs of the houses and privies. They are invisible. If the eye could see them, no one could endure them. There's even a way how you can see if there is a demon in the area by a certain process. And I'll go into that in some other videos with God's help. And they are invisible. If the eye could see them, no one would be able to endure what they would see. They surround one on all sides, all around you. Imagine that. They are all numerous than humans. Each person has at least 1,000 on his left and 10,000 on his right, and they are responsible for various inconveniences. Yet by taking certain steps in the morning, one can see their footprints in the shape of those of a cock. And that you'll find in Talmud Berachot 6:8. Whereas the Kabbalah, there's an attempt to systematize demonology, and there is no sign of such an attempt in Talmudic literature. The material is vast and enjoyed scattered in profusion without a system throughout the whole Talmud in the Midrashim. The following details takes except where otherwise indicated from one passage in the Talmud, as we see in Pesachim 110a through 112b, may be taken as indicative. Asmodeus is the king of the demons, and the queen is Agrat bat Mahalat, who was 10,000 demon attendants, each of whom can do harm. She haunts the air, and originally she held sway at all times. But Hanina ben Dosa, threatening to ban her from populated areas, relented in the answer to her pleas and permitted her to be active on Wednesday night and Shabbat, Erev Shabbat. The Babylonians, Amora Abaya, later banished her from populated areas, but still lurks in the narrow alleys, doing things in pairs, especially drinking or even a number of cups, invite the malevolent activities of demons. An exception is the 4 cups enjoined on Seder Passover. It's 4 Seder cups on Passover, for which reason the occasion is called the Night of Guarding. In other words, of guarding yourself, of protection from the demons. Exodus chapter 12, verse 42. The demons are especially harmful in areas of palm trees, and their malvolent protection is invited by easing oneself between a palm tree and the wall, by passing between 2 palms, or by sleeping in the shadow of a palm tree, or the demon palga will affect a man easing himself on the stump of a tree, of the palm tree. The demon Zerera, who learns his head on one, we read in general should avoid many branches and prickly trees, but there are special trees which are the favorite of haunts of spirits. You'll see that a lot in the hauntings in the different movies that you probably see. They typify the trees as being filled with this type of spirit. But there are special trees which are favorite of haunts of spirits. In the caper bush there resides the eyeless ruhu. Every sorb tree harbors demons. In its demons haunted, and they can be exorcised only by 16 demon amulets. This is where you get all into the mystical and the esoteric. Demons are called rishpeh, live in roots of trees. The demons ketev meriri, as we read in Deuteronomy 32 verse 34, is active in the morning. And it was by Abaye, when he was taken into company of Papa and Rabbi Huna ben Yoshua in the afternoon, place is taken by Ketev Yashud, Zocharayim, as mentioned in Psalm 91 verse 6, which looks like a goat's horn and has wings, and both these demons are particularly active in the 1st to the 16th of Tammuz. And believe it or not, this still holds true today. According to the Midrash, according to Ketev Meiri, is active during the period of mourning from the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av, between the 4th and the 9th hour of the day, as late as the 13th century of Zedekiah. Anab reports that in Rome, pupils were not punished during these days and hours because Ketev Meiri, which held swayed then, and now you can take a look at Shibolei Haleket, chapter 1, verse 203. It's covered with scales and hairs. If one has in his heart and rolls like a ball between the sunlight and the context, however, it appears that the reference to be Ketev Yashur. And so we read, the demons were prone to infest foods left under the bed, and one should refrain from drinking water on Wednesday and Shabbat and Erev Shabbat, and from pools and rivers at night. And this is where the demon Shabriri causes the blindness, and this is mentioned also by Targum Onkelos, in Genesis, based on Genesis 19 verse 11, which wreaks harm on those so doing, but an incantation consisting of an abracadabra. By the way, the incantation abracadabra is really a Hebrew form of blessing, whereby the word is repeated successively, deducing one letter from the word shabriri, briri, riri. It's an antidote. It's an effective antidote. Solomon made use of male and female demons to build the temple, according to Gittin 68b, and to bring him water from India. So we see the connection from India even to the issues of the temple, which was able to grow all kinds of exotic plants, not otherwise growing in Eretz Israel, as we see in Ecclesiastes Rabbah 2:5. And scholars were immune to the evil imaginations of demons while they were engaged in study. But Rashi explains that the passage in Talmud is to mean that, on the contrary, they're in need of a special protection since the demons are envious of them. Berachot 62a makes mention of this. And also Psalms 91 is called the Psalms of protection against harmful visitation. So any of you who basically have this fearful conceit and sense presence, Psalms 91 is the Psalms to read. Moses is stated to have recited it when he ascended to Mount Sinai because of his fear of the harmers, the mazikim, and the angels of destruction. And it is enjoyed to be recited because the world is full of evil spirits and mazikim. And this we find in another midrashic interpretation of the Psalms, and literally treasure stores of demonology, lore, as in the midrash of Psalms 91, and so forth, in Mishpatim, in Numbers Rabbah 12 verse 3 through 4. The power of demons over a man and his helplessness in the face of it's illustrated by the fact that the Talmudic metaphor for the act performed through force majuri is as though a devil, a shed, had compelled him. In other words, pushing him beyond his own will. The Talmudic commentators and codifiers accepted the belief in demons, and Maimonides was the only one that opposed it. He saw it as superstition. And so we delve in this area of, does demons exist between the superstition and the you might say the spiritualist? And this is where we're going to enter in our next video regarding to Kabbalah and the esoteric materials that take place much later after the Talmudic period. And this is one of the reasons why, as you'll understand, why I really discourage the learning of Kabbalah, because number one, it is still contaminated. And by that I mean the Kabbalah that today is being taught is not the pure Kabbalah that the ancients studied. So therefore, there's proof of this, by the way. I don't say it alone. There are many other rabbis who are true Mekabulim who also have said the same thing. You have to be very, very wary of who is teaching you Kabbalah. If you're going to get into it, you shouldn't if you don't have your basic Torah, Tanakh, Talmud bases well-founded. Most people jump to Kabbalah because you might say they're spiritually unstable in all of their ways. And this is why I encourage people, get stable, get founded on halakha, know your halakha, because Kabbalah cannot violate the halakha like many of today's Kabbalists are teaching ways to be able to even discard Torah and discard Judaism, which is not true Kabbalah. So be very wary of today's Kabbalah teachers. Everybody's talking about Kabbalah, everybody's getting into Kabbalah, and you have a whole entire multitude of people who are being literally dragged, and we'll get into this later on, by the influences of these unclean spirits utilizing these individuals to draw you into their net and pull you away from Torah instead of to Torah. So this is why you have to be very, very careful regarding who is teaching you. There's one guy he's a Sephardic Jew, very, very intellectual individual from Spain. I won't mention his name so not to cause any problems with him, but he's teaching practical Kabbalah, something that our sages told us clearly not to do. And so you have so many people for the sake of making some money, some kesef, they're getting involved in areas that is destroying people's center. This is why I'm giving this class and this series regarding the demons exist. So now that we've seen from all different perspectives they do exist, we're going to take a look at how the Kabbalists and the Kabbalah began to create a whole system in order to deal with this, and everything from the washing of one's hands to the eating of one's food is all involved with giving blessings. And there is still, of course, the Rambam goes right against this completely. He says it's just superstition. You don't need to worry about that. And he says, Tehiyeh Hashem, have a full and complete trust in God, and everything else will take care of itself. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero on part 2. Does there exist demons? So, well, we answered so far the first 2 parts, yes, there exist. In today's world, yes, and we're going to take a look a little bit more into that aspect in part 3 of Do Demons Exist?